This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
COVID-19 remains China's top priority, says country's top political advisory body ahead of its annual session. African presidents say wealthy nations have failed to support the continent in the fight against the coronavirus. And Burundians begin voting in their first competitive presidential election since a civil war erupted in 1993. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. Kenya unveiled a $500 million stimulus package for small businesses. And in sport, football supporters in Tanzania left trying to navigate life without their favorite game. China's top political advisory body has revealed its priorities ahead of the annual two sessions, which kicks off this Thursday. A spokesperson said the fighting the COVID-19 pandemic remained the most pressing matter on the table. But he also said China was still committed to achieving its goal of eradicating extreme poverty by the end of this year.
The CPPCC National Committee closely watches the impact of COVID-19 on poverty alleviation. We have conducted thorough researches and proposed many useful recommendations. This year, the National Committee will convene a special standing committee meeting on eliminating absolute poverty and establishing a long-term mechanism for addressing relative poverty, and continue its work through various means. We will further improve the quality of our work to facilitate high-quality poverty alleviation, and continue to play an active role in battling and ending poverty in China.
The spokesperson also spoke about China's efforts in fighting COVID-19. He said improving the emergency response and global governance system to secure public health would be a main focus. The top political advising body is set to kick off this Thursday until May the 27th, 4 days shorter than planned, followed by the top legislature, the National People's Congress, on a Friday. Its most important functions are giving political consultations and democratic supervision. Well, for more on that story, we're now joined by Xie Cheng, who is live in Beijing for us. Thank you so much for joining us. The meeting is happening at a time when countries are battling the coronavirus pandemic. How has the pandemic impacted this meeting, and how is it different from previous ones?
Hi, Hannah. So this year, we are finally having this NPC session once a year after a 2-month delay, and that's unprecedented in a decade. So this year, this is considered the strongest signal yet that China believes that the epidemic situation is under control in this country. However, we are not out of the woods yet. As you mentioned, we are still in this fight against the coronavirus. So a lot of uncertainties surrounding China's economy and the global recovery. And that is something that this year's NPC session will try to tackle. And this year we see a lot of differences from last year. We see less reporters because they want to keep the scale as small as possible. Because we are following this social distancing rule and policy, and that's why you see less seats in those meeting rooms and conference rooms because they want people to sit far away from each other and to stay healthy. And this year we also see a lot of new proposals regarding public health, 5G and artificial intelligence. They might look unrelated, but they are actually very important when putting together because China and other countries have been using 5G and AI in combating the epidemic and securing more, more positive policies for the economy. And in the meantime, a lot of people are asking more questions about when we are going to see a better emergency reacting system in China when it comes to this kind of public health crisis. And that's so far what I've been watching. So Hannah, this year's we are in a very difficult time, and some analysts say this is an economic hardship for China and especially European countries and the US, because they provide a lot of external demand for China's economy, and China doesn't really have any export destinations right now because other countries are still mired in this public health crisis.
Let's speak a little bit about what the expected outcomes of the meeting on Chinese economic policies will be.
Right, so this year a lot of attentions are on the economic performance in China. Of course, it's going to be somewhat ugly, and we are expecting a big package of economic stimulus, and it's going to be a combination of both fiscal policies and monetary policies. However, the PBOC's hands are tight because the inflation is still pretty high in China, and a lot of factories are still not going back to work, and a lot of companies are still firing people, so we will not be able to see a lot of products on the market, and consumers' demand is recovering pretty quickly, so the inflation will still be very high. And remember, China's economy dropped 6.8% in the first quarter this year, and that's also unprecedented. In the second quarter, we did see some recovery there, but in the third and fourth quarters, which were usually very key to China's annual growth, we are combating different battles. For example, the second wave of epidemic may come anytime soon, and people are actually not ready for that. And of course, the market is bracing for the impact of an escalating China-US trade tension, because the US might be seeking some sort of economic compensation from China to make up for the losses in the pandemic. And the US election is coming, so candidates might play tough on China just to win more votes. These are all risks that we need to take into consideration when making those policies. And these topics will be discussed at this year's NPC session. And another very important topic is job. Because of the pandemic, a lot of companies are firing people or freezing their headcounts. And a lot of smaller companies, which provide 80% of jobs in China, they're in the biggest trouble. So China may find ways to promote a bank financing for these companies to eliminate those discriminations against those smaller companies when it comes to borrowing and lending. And if that goes well, then those smaller companies might recover faster and start hiring people. And this year, the number of fresh graduates from college is at a record high. So the situation is pretty serious. Hannah.
Thank you so much, Xie Cheng. That was Xie Cheng reporting live from Beijing. Well, a point of discussion during the upcoming two sessions is the wearing of masks. CGTN takes a look at why this is likely to be the case.
What was the must-have but hard-to-find gift during the 2020 Spring Festival? I would say masks. Since the outbreak of novel coronavirus, masks have become a living necessity. When we walk outside, we have to put on a mask, just like wearing shoes. Honestly, China was not fully prepared at the early stage, and medical supplies, including masks, were soon out of stock. Nevertheless, medical treatment should be intensified. People's livelihood should be guaranteed. City facilities should function normally, and energy supplies should be assured. The outbreak is a major test for China's system and capacity for governance. Be ready to change and improve. This is a critical part of China's governance system. After identifying the shortcomings and deficiencies in the initial response to the epidemic, China shows unprecedented mobilization used to slow the rate of transmission. Over 42,000 medical staff in the country have been dispatched to the epicenter. Temporary hospitals were built. Factories were transformed to produce medical supplies. scientists have rapidly sequenced the virus genome and shared it globally. The World Health Organization appreciated China's responses to the outbreak. It said China has made obvious effect in blocking human-to-human transmission of the virus. China has also prevented or at least delayed hundreds of thousands of cases. Meanwhile, China has also played a critical role in protecting the international community, buying precious time for other countries to adopt active prevention and control measures, and providing them with worthwhile experience. A strong central leadership and a top-down decision system is a unique feature of China. It's working efficiently at curbing the virus. A further improvement of China's governing system also continues. For instance, we should continue improving the mechanism for major epidemic prevention and control. The National Public Health Emergency Management System should also be enhanced. During this year's 2 sessions, the NPC deputies and the country's top political advisors will discuss more about it. What motions and proposals will be put forward in response to the coronavirus? We, the Chinese people, and the whole world will be watching it closely.
Well, China is preparing for the highlight of its annual political calendar, the 2 sessions, which begins on Thursday. Apart from agriculture, other topics are also high on the agenda this year.
China's largest political event was delayed for 2 months due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, with the epidemic under control, China has set the new opening date for the 2 sessions, May 21st.
China is the first country to emerge with a rational plan for opening up. It has not defeated COVID-19, but it has contained it. At this point, they'll have a much clearer sense of what the rest of the year is going to bring.
However, the nation's economy was hit hard by the epidemic. The world's second largest economy saw an unprecedented decline in its first quarter GDP, shrinking 6.8%. As for 2020, the International Monetary Fund has forecasted a 1.2 percentage growth for China's economy.
Despite the IMF's forecast being quite low, China's April data has shown a strong rebound in exports, and consumption picked up in March. Now all eyes will be on the growth target, which is normally set during the 2 sessions. It will be a key barometer to plan things for the rest of the year.
Beyond China, COVID-19 has wreaked havoc around the world. From supply chain disruptions to halted trade and investment, the pandemic has been a shock to both supply and demand. As the world will be watching the 2 sessions, China's economic recovery experience will be widely watched as well.
How to contain, this pandemic while at the same time not having a very significant impact on the economy. I think these lessons are all very important for the industrialized world to take a look at.
Meanwhile, the economy and epidemic prevention will not be the only topics discussed at the upcoming sessions.
I think China is faced with an entirely new environment, global environment. I think there will be foreign policy discussions about China's Belt and Road Initiative. All these, important policy issues, I think, will be fully discussed.
This year's 2 sessions comes at a very special time as the country has just been emerging from the deadly coronavirus epidemic. Now that China's largest political gathering will get underway on Thursday, it will show that the country is ready to move on. Cao Huiyao, CGTN, Beijing.
World leaders have unanimously adopted a resolution calling for an independent review of the World Health Organization's handling of the pandemic. China was among the key countries backing the draft resolution submitted as the WHO General Assembly came to a close. The gathering normally attracts little attention, but this year has been very different. Tony Waterman explains.
It was a meeting of firsts. The first time the World Health Assembly was held virtually.
We will now invite the African Union Commission.
And the first time the meeting took place in the midst of a global crisis, with the World Health Organization facing unprecedented attention. Before the assembly even started, member states overwhelmingly threw their support behind a European resolution urging an independent inquiry into the WHO's handling of the pandemic, something the organization's chief agreed to.
I will initiate an independent evaluation at the earliest appropriate moment to review experience gained and lessons learned.
There's no time frame on when the review will start or how far-reaching it will be. Despite calls for an investigation into the WHO's performance, most member states vigorously defended the organization. France's President Emmanuel Macron called it irreplaceable, while Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel said it was the legitimate global organization. The U.S. was the outlier.
We must be frank about one of the primary reasons this outbreak spun out of control. There was a failure by this organization to obtain the information that the world needed, and that failure cost many lives.
Member states have called loudly on the global community to commit to making tests, treatments, and a vaccine accessible to all and free of charge, as attention slowly turns from containment to a long-term solution.
Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry has responded to the EU's draft resolution at the World Health Assembly.
China has actively participated in the consultation of this draft resolution with other countries. The current text of the resolution clearly supports WHO's key leadership role, calling on member states to avoid discrimination and stigmatization, combat errors and false information, cooperate in developing diagnostic tools, treatment, drugs and vaccines, trace the source of the virus and evaluate the WHO's response to outbreaks in due time.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has pointed out that the draft resolution is different from the independent inquiry proposed by Australia. It says it does not pin responsibility, nor does it target any country's response to COVID-19.
China supports the comprehensive assessment of the global emergency response once the pandemic is under control. This is to sum up experience and make up for the shortcomings. This requires a scientific and professional attitude, with WHO taking the lead role. All members should adhere to the principles of objectivity and fairness. This is China's clear position.
A Nigerian medical expert, Professor Femi Babola, has hailed Chinese President Xi Jinping's speech at the World Health Assembly. President Xi announced more plans to support countries and peoples most affected by COVID-19, especially developing countries.
China has done more than what anybody will expect them to do. They have not washed their hand off the whole rest of the world and said, well, it's your business, go and be dealing with the COVID yourself. They have stepped up to the plate. They have shown leadership. They have shown responsibility. And I want to personally commend President Xi Jinping for what he has done in this crisis. I can say it anywhere. China has behaved responsibly. They have behaved as a superpower should behave. That is, not just taking care of your own people, but actually seeing what you can do to help the less privileged. Where is America in all this? Nowhere to be found. Well, President Trump, the president of America, is going to discontinue funding the WHO. It is very irresponsible of the American government to have done that in the middle of a crisis.
Leaders of African countries have expressed concern over what they say is a lack of support by wealthy nations during the coronavirus period. Financial assistance and debt relief, according to some heads of state, is falling short of what the continent needs as it fights against the pandemic. Developed countries have so far invested into their home countries' health initiatives and economies. However, developing states say that they cannot afford to adapt the same measures. Despite recording only a fraction of the world's cases, Africa's capacity to test remains limited. It has also suffered blows from economic fallouts from global disruptions in trade, falling oil prices and lockdowns imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19. The continent is calling for a $100 billion stimulus package, a waiver of bilateral debt, and a suspension of private debt service. Ethiopian authorities say the country has significantly improved its capacity to tackle the coronavirus. This is after the country reported 35 new cases, the highest figure reported in 24 hours. The office of the Prime Minister has, however, warned that more needs to be done to curb the spread of the disease, despite recent investments in testing and response. Here is CGTN's Gurum Chala with more.
Ethiopia has for a long time managed to curb the spread of the coronavirus, but on Monday it reported what is yet the highest number of confirmed cases reported. 35 people tested positive for the virus. The government has expressed concerns.
The increase in these numbers shows us that the risk of spread still exists and the need to continue adhering strictly to measures that have been put in place by the Ministerial Committee is quite necessary.
The government also says it has significantly increased its coordinated response towards COVID-19 containment. The number of testing facilities have been tripled. The country now has the capacity to carry out more than 4,000 COVID-19 tests.
Nationally, the testing capacity has been augmented with 26 laboratories. It's to be recalled that when positive cases were announced within the country, the nation did not have strong testing capacities or facilities. Suspected cases would be sent outside of the country for testing, but now there has been a concerted effort by the Ministerial Committee to expand these testing facilities and also ramp up the daily testing capacity that we have.
Still, despite the government's precautions and health alerts, many say there is a lot that needs to be done when it comes to people practicing the advice being given. Social distancing, washing hands and staying at home seem to be less practiced in Ethiopian cities, leaving many facing the risk of catching the coronavirus. Group Jala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
More news making headlines after the break, including Burundians begin voting in their first competitive presidential election since a civil war erupted in 1993.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Welcome. You're watching news making headlines right here on Africa Live. Voting is underway in Burundi's crucial general election. Around 5 million voters are expected to participate in the polls. Citizens are electing their president, members of parliament, and communal council members. There are 7 candidates seeking to replace long-serving President Pierre Nkurunziza. The 2 main contenders being Agathon Rwasa of the opposition CNL party and Evariste Ndayishimiye from the ruling CNDD-FDD party. The Electoral Commission says there are 53 international observers who include personnel for the embassies of Tanzania, Egypt, China, Kenya, South Africa, DRC, and the African Union. Voters in the diaspora will not cast their ballot because of the coronavirus pandemic. The preliminary results for the polls is expected to be out on May the 25th. Let's go to Southern Africa now, where Lesotho officially has a new prime minister. Former Finance Minister Mokwetsi Majoro was sworn in on Wednesday morning to seal his appointment by King Letsie III. Dignitaries and diplomats attended the ceremony, which was held in the capital Maseru. Outgoing Prime Minister Tom Thabane symbolically handed over to the incoming Majoro. Thabane officially resigned on Tuesday after months of battles with rival factions in his own party, as well as growing discontent around his leadership. Thabane was also under pressure over a scandal involving the killing of his wife. The Tunisian Interior Ministry says the country has enjoyed improved security and stability during this year's holy month of Ramadan. This is largely due to the vigilance of its security agencies. Minister Hichem Michechi says several planned attacks have been foiled during this time. CGTN's Adnan Shiwashi has the details.
The Commission of Security and Defense at the Tunisian Parliament hosted the Interior Minister at its session. Hichem el-Mishishi told the MPs that some individuals pose a real threat to the country. He said dozens were arrested while planning attacks on security and military personnel and sensitive facilities.
Our security forces are extremely vigilant and ready to act, especially during the holy month of Ramadan, which unfortunately terrorist groups view as a period of escalating terror attacks against the state. We are aware of this threat, but the security situation is under control.
The Interior Minister added that some terrorist organizations have broadcast slogans openly calling on their accomplices to identify targets, plan and carry out terrorist attacks.
These calls come from networks used by the terrorist organization Daesh in retaliation for the neutralization of its leaders in Tunisia. Some cells are inciting their recruits to commit electronic or real terrorist attacks. The ministry's counterterrorism strategy has shifted its defensive and offensive approach to tracking down terrorists in their hideouts.
Authorities announced that 29 people have been arrested on terrorism-related internet crimes. In addition, the number of terrorist cases has risen to 108 in the first quarter of the current year.
I insist once again on my full confidence in our armed military forces. We trust the men and women who are using all human and technological means to protect and safeguard the country from all threats.
The Interior Ministry revealed that an organized crime network specialized in the trafficking of arms, drugs and money laundering was dismantled by the National Unit for Investigation into Terrorist Crimes and the National Guard's Counter-Terrorism Directorate. Tunisian authorities assert that the prevention of terrorism during Ramadan is a top priority. Terror cells are planning to destabilize the country by targeting Tunisian personalities, but security services have foiled several assassination plots against MPs, political leaders, as well as national figures. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's go to Egypt now, where the construction of a bridge has angered residents in the densely populated area of Giza. The flyover in the Giza suburb is a shortcut to a ring road, part of a network of speedways meant to ease traffic in Cairo. When building began a year ago, residents were assured that the flyover would be 45 meters away, but the bridge is too close to residential apartments.
Construction on this bridge started about a year ago, when they started laying the foundations. We asked about it and they said, "Don't worry, it's far away from the buildings, by about 4 or 5 meters. We said okay. Then afterwards we were surprised to find that after the foundation, they started laying the concrete. And as you can see, it's 40 or 50 centimeters away, and it's getting closer every time.
I have an apartment here. My children go to school in Giza as well. Before, I could watch my children get on the bus to school from my balcony, but now I cannot see the street at all. All I see, my whole view, is the bridge. I paid a huge amount of money for the apartment because it is in a unique area. Now all that is thrown away. They are also saying that the prices for the apartments have gone down.
Your business news after the break. Here's what's coming up. Kenya unveiled a $500 million stimulus package for small businesses. And Ethiopia introduces bank withdrawal limits to curb money laundering.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for your business news. Kenya plans to spend $503 million on its stimulus package to support businesses that have been hit by the coronavirus pandemic. According to the National Treasury, the post-COVID-19 economic stimulus package will provide credit guarantees, loans to small businesses, and help prop up tourist facilities. East Africa's largest economy faces a severe hit from the virus fallout. The nation was already struggling to boost revenue and fund development projects before the outbreak. The government has cut its projected growth to 2.5% this year, down from earlier estimates of around 6.2%. Kenya also plans to fast-track the payment of pending bills and tax refunds to companies. The stimulus package will take effect in the fiscal year starting July the 1st. To South Africa now, where Gauteng has projected 2 million job losses as a result of the ongoing lockdown. Premier David Makura said they would move to a less restrictive lockdown level at the beginning of June. This will provide much needed relief from an unprecedented economic and human catastrophe. While addressing a virtual sitting of the provincial legislature, the Premier said Gauteng may witness a Great Depression as a result of the COVID-19 effects. The province contributes up to a third of South Africa's GDP. Currently, about 600,000 people are getting food parcels to cope with the impact of the lockdown. South Africa is under lockdown in phases. The phases range from level 5 at its strictest to level 1 at its most relaxed. President Cyril Ramaphosa has promised a relaxation to level 3 by the end of May. The implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area deal has suffered a major setback due to the coronavirus pandemic. The Free Trade Area was set to be launched in July this year, but that has now been postponed indefinitely. Some analysts, however, say the COVID-19 pandemic provides an opportunity to begin implementing the free trade of essential goods and services. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rafai reports from Accra.
A landmark free trade agreement was meant to be up and running by July. But following the outbreak of the coronavirus, officials could not move in to the secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area in Ghana's capital, Accra. The launch has now been postponed.
If we don't pay particular attention going forward to the impact of the potentially disruptive impact of health issues on trade, we will not be doing justice to ourselves. And so that is a matter that we have agreed with the CDC in the implementation of the agreement to look at how we can mitigate the risk caused by pandemics on trade.
The African Continental Free Trade Area is expected to open the market for 1.3 billion people and boost intra-African trade. With border closures and the restrictions of movement of people caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, trade among African countries has been badly hit. But some analysts say the free trade agreement could still be implemented amidst the pandemic with focus on essential goods, including drugs and personal protective equipment.
We have agreed to have a free trade area. It can continue. The only phases and areas that need to be suspended for the time being, those are maybe the ones that they have to recommend. And let's say free movement of people, which have been affected now. You can't be moving from one country to another. But goods and services, now cargoes are being done. So a political decision can be made by the health system. Okay, let's trading still commence maybe in September or October, but for these areas.
While member countries have taxes waived on 90% of goods, they have yet to submit a list for the 10% of goods that will attract taxes, something analysts want done before the Secretariat sets a new launch date.
With the deferment of the commencement of the trading, it gives governments across Africa enough time to work with their private sectors, trade union organizations to identify what constitute 10% exclusion list, so that once trading starts next year, there wouldn't be anything back and forth.
Analysts suggest that these negotiations with member countries be done virtually through video conferencing. The Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area has yet to disclose when it will launch the agreement, but some experts are predicting next year. Meanwhile, with the implementation challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic, analysts say it's become critical to allow free trade of essential goods to reduce the impact of the health crisis on the continent. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
The National Bank of Ethiopia has introduced cash withdrawal limits from banks across the country. The new regulation, which is taking effect, applies to private and state-owned banks. Officials at the National Bank say the directive would be strictly implemented. Individuals can only withdraw only $5,900, while companies can withdraw a little over $8,000 daily. A monthly limit has also been introduced, with individuals allowed a $29,500, while businesses can access $73,750. The decision is informed by government interest in controlling the illegal circulation of money. Banks and all financial institutions will have to deliver weekly reports to the National Bank of Ethiopia. All stakeholders who do not comply will be fined up to 25% of the withdrawal they facilitated above the new directive. Well, over to Zimbabwe now, where new $10 banknotes have begun circulating in the country's capital of Harare. It's part of efforts by monetary authorities to try and ease a cash shortage while keeping up with soaring inflation that was 676% in March. CGTN's Farai Mokotuya has the details.
Security guard Nomo Chigweremba has finished his night shift and should be heading home to rest, but instead has to queue at the bank for cash. He hopes the introduction of new notes, accompanied by an increase in the withdrawal limits, will bring an end to the struggle.
There will be shorter queues, especially if they continue allowing withdrawals of 500 per day, because most people don't have much money in their accounts, so they will make fewer trips to the bank.
Like many in this queue, No More is forced to look for cash because some businesses have different prices depending on the mode of payment. Electronic payments attract a premium. A new $20 bill will join the $10 note in the first week of June as part of measures to ease the cash crunch. Their velocity of circulation is likely to be slowed down because under the current lockdown, most informal businesses that normally demand hard cash are closed. And there are also fears that the notes themselves could transmit the virus. The subdued demand should ensure that there's enough to go around for everyone. However, previous injections of new currency have seen temporary relief because once out of the banks, the money ends up in the informal sector.
It's mostly us, the formally employed people, who keep the money in circulation. Most people take it into the black market.
There, it is used in illegal foreign currency trading, which authorities blame for stoking inflation, and not the addition of new notes, which they say are simply replacing electronic bank balances.
I would expect that there will be inflation driven primarily by expectations of inflation, driven also mainly by expectations of a depreciation in the exchange rate. This depreciation being driven by the history that anytime we think something is happening through the printing of money, then those who sell money on the parallel market will immediately increase rates.
Despite efforts to clamp down on it, a parallel foreign currency market where the Zimbabwe dollar is trading at less than half its official value continues to operate. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Chinese telecom giant Huawei has entered a multi-million-dollar deal with Imperial College London to jointly develop new technologies. Here's Nawid Jabrakal with more from London.
And in particular, the goal...
In keeping with 2020, this year's UK Academic Salon, which brings together universities and businesses, was an online webinar. Kicking off the event, Chinese firm Huawei unveiled a $6.1 million sponsorship deal with London's Imperial College. The 5-year strategic partnership will see the two sides work together on future technologies like 5G.
We have joined nearly a decade of highly productive collaboration with Imperial College across many projects, and today's announcement is the latest chapter in that partnership. As part of this new collaboration, we will provide Imperial with world-leading technologies such as 5G, AI, cloud for a new innovation center.
The university is one of the UK's leading research institutions and has close links to China. In a separate project, it's currently working with Chinese researchers to try and develop a vaccine for COVID-19. Commenting on Tuesday's announcements with Huawei, the provost said it's a sign of growing ties between the two sides.
Huawei is one of these partners who we've worked with for a long time and whose expertise in wireless technology will help us explore how the digital world will evolve, and indeed will help us to create the future digital ecosystem.
In January, Huawei was given the green light by the UK government to take part in its 5G infrastructure network. That decision has faced some criticism, particularly from members of the ruling Conservative Party. Critics say there are security concerns about working with the firm as it has close links to the Chinese state, a claim strongly denied by the company, as well as officials in Beijing. Huawei's vice president said Tuesday's announcement will help benefit students and businesses in the UK along with the wider tech ecosystem. The political pressure on Huawei may be there in the background, but this move marks an important venture for the Chinese tech giant at one of the world's leading universities. Luigi Barkil, CGTN, London.
Bars, cafes and restaurants have reopened in Portugal. The country has a low coronavirus caseload despite having an aging population and the lowest number of ICU beds in Europe. CGTN's Mia Alberti reports from Lisbon.
For the first time in 2 months, the most famous pastry shop in Lisbon finally reopens.
It was a difficult decision to close for the first time in 43 years, but today we are excited to reopen and do what we do best.
I came here today to help this iconic house and also to give this sweet gift to family and friends. I'm sure they already miss these pastries a lot.
Restaurants, hairdressers, museums and most shops are also reopening. A sweet reward as Portugal maintains one of the lowest number of confirmed coronavirus cases per capita in Europe. Dr. Filipe Frões from the COVID-19 task force says Portugal had time to prepare, with the virus arriving later than in Spain and Italy.
We had precious days to implement a strategy that allowed us to prepare our hospital response. We also introduced the state of emergency and confinement measures earlier than these countries, so those measures had more impact.
Portugal quickly closed schools, borders, and closely monitored patients placed in home isolation. The number of ICU beds was increased by 35%. However, patient demand never reached full capacity. Most citizens also stayed at home despite the absence of a mandatory lockdown. The government says other restrictions might be lifted soon, like resuming religious services or football games, if the situation continues to improve.
The data is clear. We had a slowdown in the rhythm of new cases, fewer hospitalizations, fewer people in the ICU, a lower number of daily deaths. We have increased our testing capacity, so the criteria we set to control the pandemic has been fulfilled.
The government warns, however, that full safety from the virus won't be possible until there's a vaccine. Until then, social distancing and masks are part of the new normal. The Prime Minister has said he will have no problem in reintroducing the state of emergency if cases begin to rise again. So the situation will be reassessed every 15 days. And that's to give authorities some time to keep the pandemic under control and avoiding the economy into falling into yet another financial crisis. Mia Alberti, CGTN in Lisbon.
Your sport news after the break. Here's what's coming up. Football supporters in Tanzania left trying to navigate life without their favorite game.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for your sport news. In Africa, all football action remains suspended. In Tanzania, fans of the country's two biggest football clubs, Simba and Yanga, say not being able to follow their teams has been one of the hardest parts of adjusting to the restrictions put in place. CDTN's Daniel Kijo reports.
Tanzania's Premier League is home to one of the fiercest football derbies in Africa, between Simba SC and Young Africans, or Yanga. Die-hard Yanga fan Jimmy Kindoki started following this 50-year-old rivalry at the age of 4, as both his mom and dad were also fans of Yanga. He says, no matter which side you support, the closure of the league 2 months ago leaves a big hole for fans.
Simba and Yanga always compete and tease each other, so we have been affected in a big way, because our addiction is football. So okay, there we can't go watch football at the pitch, we can't even watch it on TV. In the end, it's all pain. To be honest, now I even had to start watching cartoons to pass time.
Simba versus Young African matches are highly anticipated by football fans across Tanzania, so much that in a recent national address, the president said he's seriously considering resuming the league.
To be honest, in these coming days, I am considering allowing the league to resume so that as others play, fans can watch on TV. We will just put in place the correct measures.
Despite the fierce competition between the teams, fans from both sides are eager for the league to return.
I would love to see Simba win the championship because we're in a good position, but we would not like to be awarded the championship. We still want to play for it, fair and square.
As it stands this season, Simba has 71 points, having played 28 matches. It has 10 games to play. Yanga has 51 points and has played 21 matches, with 11 matches left. Many fans believe that bringing football back, even with no fans in attendance, will be a much appreciated morale boost for fans starved of action during the COVID-19 crisis. It is Simba FC that currently leads the standings. But who will be triumphant to the end? Well, fans from both sides will have to wait and see. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
In England, the Premier League has announced that 6 people from 3 different clubs have tested positive for COVID-19 out of a sample of 700.